What the history? Alcatraz Island, also known as The Rock. Today, it's the nation's #1 tourist destination. But let's go back before that. Before Sean Connery even welcomed us there in the 1990s.
Welcome to The Rock.
Earlier than that, even before it was operated as the federal prison that housed Chicago mob boss Al Capone from 1934 to 1939. No, before it was even a 19th century military prison, the island, like much of North America at the time, was claimed by Native American tribes for hundreds of years before any European had set foot there. It was on the back of this ancestral land claim that a group of American Indians would later attempt to take back the island for themselves. They were going to occupy Alcatraz. You see, it was the 1960s, and protest culture in the country, and in the San Francisco Bay Area specifically, was beginning to take root. The Vietnam War led to the peace protester. Other groups, such as feminists, the Black Panthers, and college campus free speech movements followed suit. So it seemed only logical that Native American Indian groups would have issues to demonstrate on as well. Enter the Indians of All Tribes group, or the IOAT. They consisted of different tribal groups working together to use the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868, which allowed for tribes to reclaim all retired, out-of-use, or abandoned federal land. And in 1964, the year after Alcatraz Penitentiary closed, it was declared surplus federal property. So the IOAT and other, quote, Red Power activists, along with some Sioux Indians, mounted their initial attempt to make their claim of the island by protest. Apparently unaware that monetary inflation was a thing, they offered to purchase the land from the government for the same price it was initially offered to them, $9.40 for the entire island. Needless to say, a deal was not struck that day, and the protesters were promptly removed upon threat of trespassing after 4 hours. But they didn't give up entirely. It wasn't until 5 years later that any further action would be taken by the IOAT when, after a local San Francisco Indian center was lost to a fire, the tribe members felt spurred and invigorated to hatch a new plan. So on the morning of November 20th, 1969, a total of 89 American Indians, led by UC Berkeley students of tribal descent, Mohawk Richard Oakes and Shoshone LaNada Means, used private boats to navigate and successfully evade a partial Coast Guard blockade and gain entrance to Alcatraz. The one guard on the island at the time was warned of the attempt, and so when the group finally reached the island, he sent this message on his radio.
Mayday, mayday, the Indians have landed.
What followed was an occupation of Alcatraz Island by various Native American groups from November 1969 until June 1971. The entire calendar year of 1970 saw Alcatraz under the control of these protesters, which at one point had as many as 400 participants, and for their efforts, they were rewarded with outsized public and media attention, at one point even negotiating with President Nixon's own general counsel. Someone who would have his hands full just a little bit later. The occupiers made pirate radio broadcasts, wrote newsletters, and even made short films documenting their stay on the island. They were prompting a national conversation. However, group unity didn't last long when an internal power struggle ensued. One of the original leaders of the occupation, LaNada Means, was often in the spotlight as the face of their movement. So much so that charges of opportunism began to arise from within their own ranks, and even a rumor circulated that Means was offered a screen test with a Hollywood movie producer. Ultimately, the infighting created a rift on the island when the different factions couldn't agree on the same set of demands. Their leverage was weakened significantly. Fires broke out on the island, which burned out some of the original prison structures, including the warden's residence. They had difficulty acquiring enough food and fresh water from the mainland, and eventually, the situation turned tragic when Richard Oakes' 13-year-old stepdaughter Yvonne fell from a structure and died. Protesters then slowly began to disperse from the island. But perhaps the final blow to the occupations movement occurred in January 1971, when 2 oil tanker ships collided, spilling 800,000 gallons of crude oil into the San Francisco Bay. Blame for the nautical disaster was placed squarely on the occupiers, as the lighthouse was broken and not operational at the time. Public and press opinion quickly soured. Finally, on June 11, 1971, a large group of federal agents removed the 15 remaining occupiers of Alcatraz. Since then, the island has been under the control of the U.S. National Park System.
What the history?